Thank you, and welcome to the Patriots 300 Level Podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kevin. Welcome back for our 19th episode this week, where we'll be discussing last Sunday's game versus the Jaguars, talking about news around the NFL, and previewing next Sunday's upcoming game versus the Dolphins. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pats 300 Level Pod for up-to-the-minute updates and commentary on news of the day. So, Kevin, starting off with the Jaguars game, going into it, we knew it was a needed win if the Patriots want to have a shot of making the playoffs, and they were playing a pretty bad Jaguars team. And I know both of us were expecting them to have a pretty easy win, but it was more of a blowout than either of us predicted. What were your overall thoughts and takeaways from the game?
Yeah, I think it was actually kind of closer to what we were thinking. I think I said 42 to 13 at the time.
And I said 38 to 10, but it ended up being 50 to 10. So it was more than we expected.
A little bit more. I think they did what they needed to do. I don't think there's too much you can take out of this game. Other than the Jaguars were pretty bad. They're very decimated too by COVID and by injuries. I think they're down 20 something players, and they're clearly just not well coached right now. They haven't had much direction since the whole Meyer incident, but the big thing to take away from this game is that they did what they needed to do, where you see a lot of teams, they lose or they have close winnable games, and every single game the Patriots have had besides the Texans game, or actually since the Texans game, where there are games that they need to win, they've won, and they've won decidedly. And I think that's a big thing to take away from this team. So they haven't had any of those bad losses. Besides, there is that big game of the season with the Dolphins or the Saints. But I think that's my biggest takeaway. They did what they needed to do in this game.
No, I agree completely. I know a lot of people look at it and think, oh, it's just the Jaguars. You were supposed to win, so you can't really take much out of it, which I agree that you can't really take too much out of it. But unlike a lot of teams that sometimes play down to the opponents, we haven't seen that at all from the Patriots outside of maybe that Dolphins game, the first game of the year. They won 50 to 10. They scored 50 points against an NFL team. And they're just the sixth team ever in the last 20 years to have two games scoring 50 points. The other one this year being against the Jets. But they're doing it with a rookie quarterback, and two of those other six teams were Tom Brady-led Patriot teams, one of them being in 2007. So they're doing what they need to do, and they're winning decidedly. It's also a good thing that they had this game, because the two previous games against the Bills and the Colts, they just looked flat. They didn't look the same on defense. On offense, they just looked all out of sorts, except for the Colts, the fourth quarter. But essentially, they just didn't look the same. And then this was sort of like getting their mojo back, like the Jets game earlier in the year where they scored 55 points. And then that was the second win of their 7-game winning streak. So hopefully that catapults them going forward as well. They have the Dolphins next week, which we'll get into later, but going up against a very good defensive minded Brian Flores, and someone that has pretty much got the better of you the last few years. So if they can go into the Dolphins game with a big win, that will help set them in the right path going forward for the playoffs.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that. Kind of looking at the offense, I think there was some really good things to take away from this game from what they did well. I think the running attack being the biggest thing. I think Harris looked really well in this game. And Stevenson looked fresh, and he looked quick in this game as well. I think you could really see, again, what that 1-2 punch really looks like between the two of them. I think that'll help them. Kind of looking that Harris looked like he's healthy again. And then Steven coming off of the COVID list, he looked well as well. So it's good to have that 1-2 punch going into the Dolphins game coming up ahead.
No, I agree. I think the offense looked more well-rounded. We've seen some games the last 3 or 4 weeks where running attack might be doing well, but passing it didn't look great, or vice versa. But it looked really good. Very complimentary. I know the last week essentially against the Bills, the receivers weren't able to get any separation. Mac didn't have any time to throw. And then this week they were able to get separation, and Mac had a ton of time to throw. I think he was recorded for only being pressured once the entire game, or might have even been none, which is a credit to the offensive line, but also that shows what Mac can do when he has time to throw. the two previous games, he didn't really have much time to throw, and it looked like he was nervous where he was throwing quickly because he was just not comfortable. And if the offensive line is able to shore things up and give him time to throw, the offense can pretty much do what they're supposed to do and score points and drive down the field.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a big thing too that we saw in the previous games before, like you mentioned, where sometimes he was a little bit too quick to take the check down, where something was opening up. If he had just waited another half a second, 1 second, but he was a little bit too jittery from all the pressure he was getting during the game, where his internal clock was sped up a little bit. So I think that's a big point to bring up, like the line that you mentioned. And then the receivers did really well. Myers had a really big game, and Wilkerson had a big standout. Though he did also kind of show his colors why he was a practice squad player, where he had those big drops, the touchdown, the third down reception, and that second touchdown he had was a big gift for the Jaguars, where it was a completely blown coverage, where it was a very basic route that they ran, and the defender was faked out on that screen there. So credit to him for making the touchdown in that case. The first touchdown was actually it was a very well run route. He broke through the zone, caught a nice pass there, but second one, you can't really give him too much credit. But yeah, he had a nice game for showing up.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then just some context, which I know a lot of people said on Twitter after, but he had 4 catches this game with 2 touchdowns. The most catches Nikhil Harry has had in a game this year is 2. And he had as many touchdowns this game as Nikhil Harry had in his last 25 games played. Which I think part of it you can't always put on them. Last year his quarterback was Cam Newton, who only threw 10 touchdowns, and then this year he hasn't been used as much in the offense, but it's still just something to consider where Harry didn't play, and then Wilkerson at least made the most of his opportunities. He did have those 2 big drops, which are part of the reason why he has been a practice squad player, but he just showed some just another layer of depth that they have just in case.
Exactly. And kind of anything else on the offense before we go to the defense?
Not really. Just that like you said, Harry and Stevenson both ran well. Bolden has been really good as taking over that James White role, which I know we talked about sometimes, but I think it goes unnoticed a little bit. Where there was one time where he caught the ball on third down and he was gonna get tackled, and he made a move to cut inside, which we've seen a lot from James White to get those extra yards. Which is just showing that he is someone that's surprisingly dependable in the passing game. For you. I know that I wasn't expecting much of him on offense this year, and he's really just stepped up big.
Yeah, 100%. Looking at the defense, I think they played really well in this game. There was a few instances where they kind of get beat in their zone coverage where it was Lawrence actually making a really good play. There's a few of the ones where he was probably going back by 5-10 yards, almost getting sacked, and he threw a ball up there that not many could really throw with that arm strength. You could see his talent, but you could also see how he's not really well coached at all. And he's in a very bad situation. But I think the defense played really well. It was nice to see them giving Judon a big break in this game. He played and more towards the second half a little bit, but actually kind of questioned them actually even putting him out there to begin with at all. I think that he could probably use another game rest. But I think they did their jobs, and I think they played pretty well against a pretty bad Jaguars team.
Yeah, I think that they played pretty good. I want to say great. They allowed the Jaguars to score 10 points, the last touchdown being garbage time. But still, the Jaguars were able to move the ball a little bit here and there, which for a team that was that decimated going up against what should be one of the best defenses in the NFL, they moved the ball better than I was expecting, to be honest. I know they scored as many points as I predicted, but I didn't like how they were able to move the ball a little bit here and there. But they did what they needed to do. Hopefully it's a step in the right direction. They're going up against Dolphins next week. And then hopefully they can just keep improving. They definitely played a lot better than they did against the Bills, where the Bills got into the red zone all 7 drives. But definitely some room for improvement, which is at least probably a good thing for film session this week for them too.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of looking at the Jaguars, the only commentary I have is one, they're very decimated by injuries. They're decimated by COVID. And their offensive line isn't good. Their defensive line isn't that good. But I think the other kind of situation more holistically for them is, are they going to go in the right direction going forward? We kind of touched on this last week about what they're doing in their head coaching search, and them retaining their GM and kind of limiting themselves and the coaches that they're going to have. And I think they're kind of putting Trevor Lawrence at a disadvantage going forward because they're just limiting the options of people that come in, and maybe they might get the right guy because you would have to think a lot of first time head coaches aren't really in the position to be saying I want my own GM, whereas someone that's been a head coach before and has been around the block has a little bit more clout to be doing that. So maybe you might be able to get some offensive guy. Maybe Leftwich could be the answer. Maybe Dayball for not being an actual head coach might, but he's not even on their short list. So I'm not really. That's the thing I don't get. Where if I was trying to look for someone to run this team, I want someone that has that quarterback knowledge and the offensive knowledge to transform Lawrence in the right direction. So the three names I would think of right off the top would be Josh McDaniels, because he's done it with four quarterbacks. He's at least done it, not really transformed Brady, but he was here with Brady. But then he helped groom Matt Castle. He helped groom Jimmy Garoppolo. He helped groom Jacoby Brissett, who is not a great quarterback, but he's a serviceable NFL quarterback who's going to be in the league for 10, 15 years. And now Mac Jones, Brian Daboll, where he's kind of transformed Josh Allen from an awful quarterback to a very, very good quarterback. And then Eric Bieniemy, I don't know really too much about him. Everyone in the league is very high on him, being a very big offensive mind. The only thing that I always question with him is what does he actually do in Kansas City? Because he is the offense coordinator, but Andy Reid, rest in peace, Harry Reid. Andy Reid is the one I believe that calls all the plays. He's got the play sheet. He's always buried in the play sheet. And that's kind of actually a little bit to his fault, where he takes a little bit too much accountability on the offense and doesn't really know what's going on with the defense. And that's why his clock management skills aren't that great. But one of those offensive minded coaches, and it doesn't seem like they're lining up to get one of those. So that's kind of my biggest kind of takeaway with them, where they could ruin this kid's career, or maybe they might find out the right way by luck, but they're not really doing it the right direction, I don't think.
I agree entirely. I think what we've noticed the last 2 weeks, just looking into the Jaguars leading up to this game, and then just watching them, they were decimated just because of COVID and everything and some injuries, but it's just such a dysfunctional organization. I think them and probably the Washington football team are probably two of the most dysfunctional teams in the NFL, where in the last 14 years, they have one winning season. One in 14 years. That's through a number of coaches, a number of different quarterbacks. And I understand you can only do so much with what you're given, either at quarterback or other players. But I think a lot of it has to do with just the ownership and like top down. Like you said, the coaches that they're interviewing already, you would think, given that you have who you think is a transcendent quarterback, your franchise quarterback for the next 15 years, you hope. And you'd want to put an offensive mind that can help groom him. He hasn't had a good year this year. Part of it is due to the teammates around him, that he wasn't really put in a good position this year to win or to perform well. But you want to put him around an offensive mind that will be able to make the most out of him, get him to play to that next level. And the people that they're interviewing aren't really there. Like you said, I think the three top minds would be McDaniels, Dayball, and Bieniemy. Bieniemy is still like a question mark because you don't know how much of it is Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and how much of it is actually him. But you think that those are like three of the top offensive minds, and they're not even considering them. I don't know if it's also they reached out and they just said, all three of them said no, they're waiting for a better spot. I think Brian Leftwich might make a little bit of sense. He used to be with the Jaguars. He led them to the playoffs. So he has that. He can bring that to the fans and everything, but also he is the quarterback, or he is the offensive coordinator for Brady. So I know Brady leads the team. He's essentially in charge of the offense, but I'm sure Brian Leftwich has actually learned a ton about offense and about quarterback play from coaching Brady the last 2 years, which he could possibly bring to the Jaguars and help Trevor Lawrence. I mean, the only other person that I saw that they're interviewing that might make a little bit of sense is Doug Peterson, since he led the Eagles to the Super Bowl. He led them to the playoffs a few times with a backup quarterback. But other than that, it doesn't really make sense who they're interviewing and considering the other candidates that are out there.
Yep. And then even the Doug Peterson fact, where everyone kind of says that Frank Reich was really the piece behind that Super Bowl run with that team, and it wasn't really Peterson. So that's really a question mark there, because what did Peterson do after Frank Reich? He didn't really do anything. So just interesting to see what they're doing, and it'd be a shame if they ruin this kid's career. He still could even he still could even kind of transcend it if he's that good of a player. But usually we see, if you're not put in a good situation, if you're not with a good coaching staff, or at least good players, where you saw with Aaron Rodgers, he wasn't with the brightest mind of them all, but he's McCarthy's very good at developing quarterbacks. He's done it in the past before. So at least he has some skill with that. It's just interesting to see what will happen. Looking at Mac, I know we can just briefly touch about it. There's not really much to kind of discern over this one. I think he played well. I don't think he was excellent or anything like that. I think because it's really tough to really tell in this game. I think he played really well against a bad team. Took the opportunities that were there. And really the biggest mistake was that sack that ended up turning into the very poorly called pass interference play, where he was barely touched.
Roughing the passer.
Yeah, what did I say? Roughing the passer. But yeah, I think he played really well. Took the plays that were there. I don't think he did anything like transformational or anything in this game, but I think it was a good step in the right direction for him.
No, I thought I agreed. I thought he played really well. It's tough to grade it because of how decimated the Jaguars were, but for what he was given, what he was going up against, I thought he played exceptional. He had a lot of drops that weren't his fault, where he ended up being 22 to 30 passing. But if you can take those drops out, it's probably closer to 90% or higher passer rate or completion percentage. So he just took what the defense was given. He had a nice QB scramble, which I think he probably gave up a little too early, but it showed that he's able to be mobile too when needed. Not that we want him to be mobile, but if he has to scramble for a first down every now and then, he has that ability to. But I thought he played really well, considering the down performances he had the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, agreed. Looking at 3 up, 3 down, I can give my first, then we can kind of just alternate. My first one is Ramondre Stevenson. Actually, I'll do all 3 at once. That way, in case we have overlapping ones, we don't have to explain why everything. I've got Ramondre Stevenson, Kyle Duggar, and Jacoby Myers. Ramondre, I think, had a really good game this one. Very quick, explosive. You could tell how he's going to be one of the backs of the future with this team. Kyle Duggar, I think, had a very big bounce back game from his previous 2 games. Previous 2 games. I think he played with the Colts.
He played the first or a little over a half against the Colts and then was ejected.
Yep. He didn't play well in that game though. So he had a big bounce back game from those 2. He had a really good play in the beginning of the game where he came up and made a huge tackle for not too much of a gain. He had that interception, and then Jacoby Myers played really well. Another touchdown catch for him, and I think that was a really nice kind of route and nice throw by Mac there as well. So those are my 3 up in there.
Yeah, for me, I think my number 1 is just the offensive line. Considering their bad performances the 2 previous weeks, where they were pretty much getting pushed around. Last week against the Bills, they were allowing pressure on 36% of dropbacks. And then this game, they allowed, I believe, 1 pressure or no pressures the entire game. Granted, it was against a worse defense, but still, everything considered, that was a pretty good performance. And then they led the way in the running game too. Number 2 is Ramondre Stevenson / Damien Harris, just because both of them, when they were in the game, they were productive. I know Harris didn't get as many carries, probably because they wanted to save him a little bit since he is still coming back from that hamstring injury. But both of them ran the ball really hard. They're a really good 1-2 punch. As we've seen, when both of them are in, I think they're even more productive because they have those slightly differing styles. Whereas if only one of them is playing, like when Harris was out, Stevenson wasn't able to be as productive. But having them both together, they've been playing really well, and they did it again this week. Number 3 is Jacoby Myers. Just had another really good game. think 7 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown, something like that. But he's been your leading receiver, one of your most dependable receivers, where if you need to get a third down or you need to get a big play, Mac has been looking his way, and he's pretty much been able to catch most of them. And then just fourth is just Mac, where after having bad first 3 quarters against the Colts and having a bad game versus the Bills, he had a really good bounce back game this week.
So my 3 down, this is kind of really tough and little kind of nitty picky near the end. So my first one, Giovanni Tavai, they tried him out in the middle linebacker spot to try and see if maybe he might be kind of good in that coverage situation, because they've had poor kind of execution in that spot. He did not do well. So he didn't do well in coverage and space in that part. So he was not good in this game. Next one, Nikhil Harry. That was a little ticky-tacky. But the fact that he can't get into the game and kind of just showed the difference between him and Wilkerson, where Wilkerson at least has some explosion plays that he can kind of show you in a game, where Nikhil, you'll maybe get one every like 4 games, where he'll have that one throw where he boxes someone out and uses his body like he should. But just this is more of just Nikhil Harry in general, where such a lack of a use of his talent has been so frustrating to watch. And it kind of just was shown here with Wilkerson. Not that Wilkerson's going to be great or anything. He's not. He has the case of the drops. And then the last one I have was just some of the play calling near the end of the game, where they're up by 40 or 50 at the point. I'm fine with them trying to get 50 points or anything like that. But I don't like trying to have some of those tough catches in the middle of the field where you could get one of your players killed, where Bourne almost got concussed, or he probably is a little concussed and just didn't admit it. But you never want to see someone get hurt in a blowout game because you're trying to go for it. So that was just my only kind of little quibble with it.
Yeah, I think number one, mine was just Tavai as well. I know that with Hightower and Bentley being free agents this upcoming year, or this free agency, that I think their hope was for Tavai to make that next step next year to possibly, I don't know if to take over completely, but take some of those snaps. And he just didn't have a good game. And I know he was playing a little more this game as well. So not encouraging to see, but he also, for this current team, he isn't as needed as some of your other players. So it's not as big of a deal, but going forward, it's not great. And then number 2 is just special teams, which has been surprisingly an issue all year. And it's not always the same. They've had 3 blocked punts this year, the offside on the field goal. And then this game, they had the 2 missed extra points, one of them being blocked. And I believe the other one was, I think it was a bad
snap.
A bad snap.
I think.
Either bad snap or bad hold.
Something.
So it didn't really matter in this game because they won by so much. But in the playoffs, when everything is so magnetized and minute, where any small mistake can cost you, it's not really great. And I'm not saying that this specific instance will be, but just special teams as a whole, the block punts, offsides, people not being in the right spots, or even the missed extra points in general. I know both of those weren't Nick Folk's fault, but I think he has 5 or 6 missed extra points on the season this year. So we saw in the Broncos AFC Championship game in 2015. If Steven Gostkowski didn't miss that extra point when they scored that touchdown at the end, they don't need to go for 2 and they go into overtime. But since he missed that extra point, they had to go for 2 and they missed going for 2 and they cost them the game. They might have lost when they got into overtime, but we didn't know either way. If he didn't made that extra point, then they got the ball first in overtime and went down and score, we'd be talking about them being in the Super Bowl 5 straight years instead of 3 straight years and 4 times in 5 years. But it didn't matter as much in this game, but it's definitely concerning. And I think I wouldn't be shocked if special teams coordinators going after the year.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happen. Was that 3?
I only went with 2. I don't have a third down.
All right. All right, so I'm looking for next, just our 5 questions with us. What's your first one that you have? You have a special quarterback question.
I do. So if you were a GM and you needed to get a quarterback and these were your only options, who would you go with? Baker for your franchise going forward the next 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins,
Yep,
Jimmy G, or Jared Goff.
Oh, it's a tough one. 4 to 5 years.
Yes, or more.
Actually,
the
no.
future,
That's not
just...
that tough. It's you said it's between Baker, Jimmy G, Cousins, or Goff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. I pick Baker Mayfield every day. I was thinking about this even more yesterday when I was realizing, or maybe the day before, one of the Steelers game was. I forgot about Baker playing this whole year with that torn labrum, and that completely changes your mechanics. It changes how your throws are, and that's why his accuracy is a lot worse right now. So I think to judge him on what he's doing this season is very it's not fair to him, and it's actually how he played through that where that could really sideline those people, and it should. Is kind of a credit just how tough he is. I think he's a winner. I think that he's tough as nails. I don't think he had the right situation really behind him at the beginning of his career. So it did kind of maybe stifle him a little bit, but I still think in the right situation and being healthy, I think he would do really well. I think if he was drafted by the Patriots like they wanted to, if he fell to number 2, I think he would have been in lot better of a situation and kind of been a little bit better. I wouldn't. The thing about Jimmy is that I would say he's number 2, but he's just not toughy and he can't last the whole season. We've seen every single time. This last one, it's a real injury. It's not something where you can really play through. Where he's gonna need surgery. He has a broken bone. He has a torn ligament on his thumb. When Brissett tried to play through it, he had a huge bandage over his thumb the whole game, could barely grip the football. So it's not something where you could play a whole season with it. But Taysom Hill is playing with the same sort of thing, but I don't know the severity. But Russell Wilson needed surgery in season that took 6 to 8 weeks. So it all depends on the severity, but it is a real injury, but he seems to always get them. So I wouldn't pick him. Oh, you?
Yeah, it was tough. I ended up, as much as I don't like to say it because I think he's very overrated, I have to go with Kirk Cousins.
Oh my God.
Because I still think Baker's trash. I don't blame him not playing well this year I think the injury is a significant portion because of that. But I think the coach isn't as good. I know he won coach of the year last year, but we saw that against the Steelers, you have the best running back or one of the top 2 running backs in football. And you're having Baker throw 40 plus times when Chubb is just pretty much standing on the sidelines when he was being productive. And we've just seen that time and time again where pretty much they're just throwing when they shouldn't be or whatnot. But I still think going back, I said it even before the injury, I don't think Baker's that good. Jimmy G, I want to go with because you don't know when he's going to be healthy. The chances are, with your luck, if he's your quarterback in a big game, AFC NFC championship game, he's going to be hurt and he's not going to be able to play. So him by default is just disqualified. Jared Goff sucks, so he's out. So it's pretty much between Baker and Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, I think, is the Tony Romo of the NFL. I think of the current NFL. I think he's one of the most overrated quarterbacks, where he has good stats, but he can never win those games, which is why I think it's tough to go between Baker and Kirk. But he is productive, and that's why I'd have to go with him out of the 2. But I don't think any of them I'd want to be my quarterback going forward.
That's why I'd go with Baker, because Baker's a winner and Kirk Cousins a loser. That's what he is.
I don't know if Baker really is a winner, though.
You saw it in college. You saw just his stones that he has.
No, I agree that he's tough and he plays through it, but
I don't know. I just always think that he's gonna do well if he finds the right spot. It's not gonna be there.
Yeah, but I mean, with the Browns, you could argue for the last couple of years, he had Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb out of the backfield, with Kareem Hunt being a really good dual threat. And he also had Odell. I know Odell has taken a step back, but also Jarvis Landry. And then also Hayden Hurst at tight end. And before that, Austin Hooper. Or no,
I don't think the coaching staff's there that good.
But still, you have that talent on offense, and he's not able to do much. I've seen enough from him where I think he's an okay quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback.
I think if you got him the right coach, he would you pick it up another level.
I don't think so, but agree to disagree. That's why I wanted to ask that question. I wanted to see what your thoughts were.
Next question: 3 players who exceeded expectations for the Patriots this season. So I think this is pretty easy for me to decide. I went with Ramondre Stevenson. Usually running backs in the Patriots, they usually redshirt their first year. I wasn't expecting him to do anything, even though he did well in the preseason. Just based on historical, the only time a running back really played his first year was Sony Michel, recently at least. So Ramondre's done really well, and I think he's going to be a future back for them. Ted Carris, he was supposed to be a backup offensive lineman, has kind of solidified that left guard spot. And he even Weno got in for a little bit of snaps at guard towards the second half of the game, and Carris blew him away by how he's playing compared to Weno.
And then played center, went back to center when Wenu went to guard.
Yep. And then Christian Barmore. I know that that's another thing where it's a rookie that's having a lot of playing time, and it's just usually rookies in this team in general, not even running backs, but rookies in general don't play that much. And just the amount of snap count, how he's playing, how effective he is, the fact that he's getting double and triple teamed at some points, just kind of shows how well he's been playing, and he's only going to get better as it goes on. So I think those are some pretty easy ones to pick there.
Yeah. Mine are very similar. My number 1 is just Ted Carris, where he's been probably your most dependable offensive lineman this entire year. I know David Andrews, and Shaq Mason are good, but they've had some off games here and there. But Steady Teddy has been your most dependable guy. And it's just frustrating going back that why wasn't he playing those first 6 games, where if he was playing, you might have won some of those games when Trent Brown was hurt. And instead of being the wild card 5 seed, 6 seed, depending what happens this week, if you win one of those games, you're the number 1 seed going into the playoffs. He could have helped to win possibly 2 of those games or even 3 just by holding up that offensive line, giving Mac time to throw, which is just frustrating. It's good that they finally got him in, but I still can't comprehend how they waited as long as they did. Number 2, like you said, Christian Barmore. He's been one of the best interior linemen this year on the defensive side. Just getting pressure. I believe he has the most double teams out of any interior lineman in the NFL, and he's still being productive. Even if he doesn't have a high sack number, he's disrupting plays, whether it's the run game or the passing game. He's getting into the backfield. He has, for interior rookie defensive lineman, I think he has the second most pressures out of anyone in the last decade, with 45, and I think the most is 46. And with their style of defense, he's still being double and triple teamed, and he's still being that productive, which is just impressive. My number 3 is Adrian Phillips. I know he had a pretty good year last year, but how dependable and how versatile he's been this year. He's been their most dependable player on defense, and you could argue possibly their most important player on defense. And I know when they signed him, he didn't really play much defense with the Chargers. He was an all-pro, but that was special teams. And he played a lot last year, but it looks like this year he just took that next step. And I know he was going to be a free agent this upcoming offseason, but they re-signed him to a steal of a contract, 3 years, $12 million, which I saw reports that I think if he got to free agency, he was projected to get anywhere between $8 to $10 million a year. So to get him for $12 million for 3 years is insane. And I think that's a good value contract. I'm glad they did it. And I think just an honorable mention is Ramondre Stevenson, like you said, where part of it was just because I think he just had a really good camp, and that allowed them to trade Sony Michel because they were expecting him to play a little bit. But he's just been very productive when he's been on the field.
Yep. I can't agree more. For the 3 underachieved this season, I think this is kind of easy as well. Nikhil Harry, number 1. He's always an underachiever. He's just got so much physical talent where he's big and he's got that size that he could use to advantage, and he's got decent hands at some point if he's focusing. But it's just the lack of what he's been able to do with it. He's completely underachieved his whole career, basically, and this year as well. So he got another chance this year, and he just hasn't taken that much. He's been a decent blocker. That's pretty much it. And that's not what you draft someone in the
He's
first
been a
round
very
for.
good blocker, but
It's
it doesn't
not
make up for
really
his.
it's not if they grabbed anyone else that was as big as he was, they'd be doing the same thing, and they wouldn't need to draft someone in the first round for that.
No, I understand, but
mhm.
he's been underachieving, but he still is important in the running game as a blocker.
Yeah.
But
They could find someone else for that. It's not.
I agree. I agree completely.
That's
but
an
I'd
easy
say
thing
he's
to
better
find.
than just a decent blocker. Is all I was trying to say.
Next one, Jake Bailey. He has had a very bad year this year. And I'm hoping it's due to injury. We're likely to not see him next year if they do draft Matt
Areza.
But we'll see what happens there. My last one is Devon Godzill. For the amount of money that they're paying him and the fact that they've had to demote him from nose tackle to end, and even at end, he's sometimes getting pushed around, is not good. I think he had a stretch where he was playing decent, but the amount of bad games he's had kind of outweigh the good games that he had, and the fact that he's having to do it not at the nose anymore, and that he can't really take on good centers. Where he did really well that one game against the Bills, and that's because their center is not good. So those are my three.
I think those are fair. We don't have much overlap. My number one is Josh Uche, just because we were expecting him to have that breakout year where he was good in burst last year when he saw the field. And then in this offseason, training camp, preseason, we just heard from all the reporters and everything, and even just watching preseason, that he looked like he was making that next step. First 2 games, he had 3 sacks. And then after that, he got hurt. And then he hasn't really seen the field much, where you were thinking going into the year, especially after watching the preseason, where you have Matthew Judon, who's just playing outstanding on one side. And if you have Uche on the other, you're going to be able to disrupt the quarterback, since the first 6 weeks they were going to be without Gilmore. And then we weren't sure if they were even going to keep Gilmore. You were thinking that you need to get pressure considering the lack of depth you have in the defensive back area. And you thought you're going to be able to get it from Judon on one side, Uche on the other. And you just haven't gotten that performance. Even when he has been in, he hasn't been able to really make much of an impact. And just the fact that he hasn't been able to be on the field much to begin with is just disappointing. Hopefully with this upcoming offseason, preseason and everything, he takes that next step and he can be that productive player we thought he was going to be next year. But just so far, I've just been very disappointed with him. Number 2 is Jake Bailey. I completely forgot to include him on my list until you said him, but so I have to add him. He's just been, at least especially compared to his standards set last year, where he had one of the best NFL seasons for a punter. He's just been very disappointing, very inconsistent, just not good. And I don't know what it is. Hang time's not good on punts. He's shanking some punts out of bounds. I don't know if it's an injury. Even kickoffs haven't been that great. I don't know if it's an injury. I don't know if it's something mental, but like you said, I'm highly expecting them to take Matt Areza, assuming he's available at the end of the 3rd round. I think they'll use their 3rd round pick on him, but I don't know if he'll be available, but that's my expectation. Just because of how much, if Jake Bailey performed as well as he did last year, I don't think that's the case. But considering he's been, unless they think it's an injury that's holding him back and it'll heal this offseason. But considering he's been so inconsistent this year and Areza as a left-footed punter and he's had as good of a year as he did, I just think that this is the last we'll see of Bailey. Number 3 is Jonnu Smith, where when they signed him and Hunter Henry this offseason, you thought they're going back to those old Patriot teams where 2014 or 2016 before Gronk got hurt, you had Gronk and Martellus Bennett. 2010 through 2012, you had Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. Even back in the older Patriots teams, you had Christian Fourier and Daniel Graham. And then 2004, you had Christian Fourier, Graham, Ben Watson. And even 2003, you had Mike Vrabel at that tight end spot, where you're expecting to get a lot of production out of the tight end spot. And you have a rookie quarterback, and he just hasn't been that person they were expecting. His blocking has definitely improved a lot as the season's gone on, but I don't think they're paying him $12 million a year to be a blocking tight end. I don't know how much of it is just him not learning the playbook or him not picking up the offense. I know they signed him to a 4-year deal, so part of it might be that this is more of a redshirt year, and then next year he'll take that next step. but you can see the talent he has. I know he's also had a couple plays, or probably a lot of plays actually, wiped out by penalties that weren't his fault. But I was just expecting more than what he's given them.
Yep. I think with him, he's just kind of overthinking. It looks like he's overthinking.
Yeah.
And he's not playing. He's not. What is the word I'm thinking for? I can't think of the phrase, but he's he's not going with the flow, and he's overthinking it, and he's worrying about what's going to be happening next. And I think that Saints game kind of got in his head a little bit, but also this offense is really difficult to comprehend and learn. So it's something where it's probably taking him time to really understand. I think next year we'll probably see a little bit better out of him. Right now, just another kind of good thing. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but one kind of analysis with him, what it looks like when he's catching the ball. It looks like someone's throwing him a baby, the way that he's catching it, where he stops and he's like is trying to make sure he grabs it. And it's not like a fluid motion. It's not where he's grabbing the ball in step and he's be able to run that. He kind of stops a little bit to try and make the catch and kind of set himself up to grab it, where it just doesn't look right.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of mental after that Saints game. And I think it's just him, a lot of him just overthinking it. But hopefully they can just feed him the ball. I really hope they feed him the ball a lot against the Dolphins, where he can sort of have that breakout game where once you get into the playoffs, you have that extra threat on offense that they're kind of missing.
Yeah.
And then just honorable mention, since I had him as my number 3, but I forgot to include Jake Bailey, is Nelson Aguilar. They signed him to be a deep threat. He had a lot of drops. I know against the Colts, he actually had a pretty good game before he got concussed, where he caught a lot of contested balls, but they're paying him a lot of money. Next year he has a $14 million cap hit, and he's just not performing where I thought he was going to be, that deep threat where Mac's able to air it out. And then just by having that deep threat, you have to have someone watching that, maybe a safety over the top on him, just be careful of that. And that opens up the offense for everyone else. Maybe Jonnu Smith going through the center of the field or someone else. And just because he hasn't been able to perform like the money they're paying him, I just think he's been a little bit of a disappointment this year. And I think his cap hit next year is going to possibly hinder them.
Going forward next, Roethlisberger played his probably last game at Heinz Field, probably second to last game with the Steelers, but, unless there's a big upset win by the
Jaguars. The Colts.
Yeah, Jaguars against the Colts, and then they need the other two teams, the Raiders and the Chargers, not to tie, which could be an interesting thing to see what happens if the Colts do lose the game, because theoretically both teams could get in if they do tie. If one of them loses, they don't get in. So interesting to see what they do if they both decide they want to lose, both tie.
I don't think they do that.
I don't think they'll do it though. But if I were,
it would be fun to watch, but I don't think they would willingly do that.
Yeah. But so it looks like he's probably got one more game left in his career and he'll be done. Any just quick thoughts, not anything long, about Roethlisberger? What do you think of him in his career?
I think he's had a really good career. I think he obviously had 2 Super Bowls early on. First year as a rookie, he was 13-0 in the regular season. Then his only loss was against the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, when they were the 1 seed. Then won the Super Bowl the next year, won it again a few years later. Was able to endure headache of teammates, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Claiborne, Le'Veon Bell. But he's had a lot of talent around him, and he has been productive. I think just the one thing that I always think of when I think of Ben Roethlisberger is he's just a tough son of a bitch, where he'll get injured and he'll still play his way through it, or try and play his way through it. You always see him, like, there's always those memes and pictures of him in practice where he has like 4 things of ice around both shoulders. He's in a walking boot, but he always finds a way to be on the field, and he'll take hits. He's a big guy and he's tough to tackle. I think he had a good career. I don't think he's top 5 quarterbacks of all time, but I think he'll probably be a Hall of Famer. And I think he had a pretty good career. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I agree. I think he kind of underachieved a little bit, if anything, where I think he kind of gave up towards the end of his career. And you kind of see it with just the amount of weight he's gained over the last 5 years, and it kind of looks like he's kind of stopped carrying as much as he used to before. You can kind of see that just based on how players are with their bodies or anything like that. He's not in shape. He's gotten bigger.
Yeah, he's not on the TB12 diet.
No. So I think he's definitely kind of hasn't given it all his last few years. And I think with all the talent around him, and part of it is just the coaching around him and the
Yeah,
defense.
that's why I blame it
Um,
more that they had a lot of talent and
mhm.
the Steelers as a whole have underachieved, where you could argue from 2012 to 2017, 2018, they had the most talented roster in the NFL.
Mhm.
And for them to not make the Super Bowl once, to only make the AFC Championship game once,
Mhm.
I think is a complete underachievement. But I blame that a lot more on Tomlin than I do on
Yeah.
Roethlisberger.
And it's that big. They historically have played that soft zone coverage and defense,
Yeah,
and that's what the Patriots have killed over the years. So that's part of the thing. I think coaching is a big part, but I also think that just his last few years, he hasn't given up, but he's also been older. But I think he's a very good quarterback. Probably a Hall of Fame, like you said, 2 Super Bowl wins. So not really much more there, but it was nice to see that kind of thing before the game with his kids walking on the field with him. And or maybe that was after the game, whatever that picture was.
after the game.
The last thing is the Antonio Brown situation. I don't want to take too much time off with this asshole, but more development just came out right before we actually started recording this, so I don't really know what to think about this whole kind of situation. It's the craziest thing I've actually ever seen before. I don't think I've ever seen. I've seen players like throw their jerseys off or anything, like if they're hurt or they're getting out of the game. I've never seen someone quit on the sideline. Besides someone quitting like after the half, but I think I've only seen that once. So
Yeah, Vontae Davis.
It's just a weird situation in general, and I honestly don't really know what to think about it now. Where I really think I was telling you this beforehand after his kind of statement came out. I think it's the truth's probably closer to the middle, where I don't believe everything Arian said. I don't believe everything Brown said, because you have to realize when you look like that, you look like an insane, and he is insane. But that's not something normal to do. And the fact that Mike Evans was pleading with him to keep his jersey on, to stay on the sideline, I don't really know if he was cut on the sideline at that point. I think there was some words exchanged, and maybe Brown quit himself, or was something similar. But I don't think it was as rosy as it happened where, oh, my ankle's hurting me, I'm just going to sit down on the bench and nothing go on. Where if a player's hurt, they go to the trainer right away and they say, I'm hurt, and they go to the tent. That never happened from what we've seen so far. And his story made it sound like my ankle's hurting me, I just sat on the bench and that was it. And then when Aaron's came over, I was like, I'm done. And then he said, you're not done, you're going back in. And that just doesn't make any sense either. But I could also see Aaron's kind of losing it himself, because he's kind of losing control of that team a little bit, where there's a big power struggle between Brady and him we've heard about. So I think they're probably both in the wrong in the situation, but the key thing is I wouldn't sign AB when he's cut at the end of the year. He's probably not going to be cut this whole year, because they're going to try and make some sort of suspension thing, get him off of it, and then kind of make a clean break so they don't have to pay him. But I don't know. It's just a weird situation.
Yeah, I know when I saw I think it was Schefter that tweeted at first that Antonio Brown has taken his jersey and pads off and has left the field during game. I was wondering, is he hurt or something? Then I looked, and then I saw the videos and everything, and it was just, I think the video is what just brings more just like more amusing, where if you just heard that and he just left, but him like trying to throw it into the stands, then him like giving the peace sign, running off the field. I think that's just who AB is. I think he's just not right. I do, after seeing the report come out or a statement that came out by him and his agent or his lawyer, I don't know what to really believe. I think when I first read it, my thought is similar to you, where I think it's somewhere in the middle of what he's saying and what Arians is saying. I'm sure his ankle is hurting him. They were losing by 14 to the Jets. He was probably a little pissed off. And then I'm sure like he told Arians, if his story is somewhat true, I think it would be more like he told Arians that Arians came over saying, what the hell are you doing? Why aren't you playing? He said, my ankle hurts. And then Arians probably said something along the lines of, if you're not able to play, then get the hell out of here. And then AB might have interpreted that as he was being cut and then just
Mhm.
left. But I think if he was cut, why would Mike Evans be pleading with him to keep his jersey on and stay on the sideline?
Mhm.
So that's where I think it was somewhere along the lines of they misinterpreted each other. I think Arians is a jackass, so I don't entirely believe everything he says.
Mhm.
And if AB's statement is true, where multiple leading doctors are saying he has a fracture that's where the bone is protruding, I think the injury is real. But I think what happened transpired in between the two of it is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I could definitely see that where if you're hurt, then go to the locker room or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he took that as, or there was something where if like it was like, no, I'm not playing, or and it's like if you leave, you're done or something. And there's probably some argument, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Yep.
Really quickly on news around the NFL AFC besides that. Bengals beat the Chiefs in a pretty comeback game from the Bengals, and Burrow looked really well in this game. I'm not sure if you really have anything to add on that, but that does kind of really shape up the AFC where it stings a little bit more, where if the Patriots just split between the Bills and the Colts or didn't have that fumble against the Dolphins, they'd be the number one seed right now. So that's kind of the biggest story really coming out of that game.
Yeah. I think it just shows that the AFC is, I think it's there's a lot of parity in the AFC where any of these teams, I think the Chiefs are still the number one team going into
Mhm.
it, going into the playoffs, where they're the team to beat. But I wouldn't be shocked if any of these teams that make it, any of the top 6 teams that make it to the Super Bowl. Probably not the Colts because of Carson Wentz, and probably not the Titans because unless Derrick Henry's 100%, because Tannehill's the QB.
Mhm.
But I could see the Chiefs, I could see the Bengals, I could see the Bills, I could see the Patriots, and maybe the Chargers if they get lucky. But their coaching is they're the
Mhm.
Chargers, so I don't know what to really think. I think that I texted you this during the game, and I think I texted you it earlier today that even though the Bengals won, I think their last series of plays kind of showed that when they get into the playoffs, I don't know if their coaching is going to be enough to win, because those 2 fourth down calls on 4th and 1 at the goal line were just
Mhm.
absolutely horrendous. I don't have an issue going for it on 4th down,
Mhm.
where if you kick the field goal, you go into overtime, or you're giving Patrick Mahomes, or was it overtime or was it to take the lead? It was to take the lead. Sorry. It
Mhm.
was the field goal to take the lead, but you're giving Patrick Mahomes the ball back with a minute. I don't have an issue with you going for it, not taking the points, going for the touchdown, so the Chiefs have to get a touchdown. I have an issue with the 2 specific play calls. They were just horrendous play calls that were low chances
Mhm.
of success. I know Burrow is great. I know they have 3 really good wide receivers and they have a really good running back, so they're going to be tough, but their defense isn't great. And I
Mhm.
don't know if the coaching is there. I think Taylor's a very overrated coach, but I will have to see. I think that it definitely shows there is another team you have to compete for. And
Mhm.
if the Bengals lose this week and the Patriots win, the Patriots are playing at the Bengals first round of the playoffs.
Yep. Well, that's if
Assuming the Jets
the
don't beat the Bills.
yeah, which could realistically happen based on how
I
well
don't
the
think so.
Jets are playing, but it's probably not. If there is some weather, I think it's more likely, because going to the next one, the Bills had a very sloppy win against the Falcons, and I think it's really kind of another just defining thing where we've seen it time and time again with the Bills. They're not really made to play in bad weather at all. This
Yeah.
game was snowy, a little windy a little bit. And every single kind of weather game that they played in, they haven't looked well, and they're not really built to play in the weather. So I think that's really my one takeaway with this game, where they almost threw it away because they're just not that tough, I don't think.
And I think it still just shows the inconsistency of Josh Allen, where
Mhm.
the week before he had a unbelievable game where
Mhm.
some people were saying that he should be the MVP. And then he turns that around where you see that and you think maybe that's why the Bills are paying him $256 million over the
Mhm.
next 6 or 7 years. But then the next week to just have a completely dreadful performance against, I understand it's a Dean Pease defense but still it is the Falcons where they're not that good. So I still I don't buy into Josh Allen until I see it in the playoffs and him do it on multiple occasions. I don't think he's that guy.
Yep. No, I 100% agree. And then the last thing, the Titans, number 1 seed. I think it just kind of shows how kind of, I think, good of a coaching job I think Mike Vrabel's done with this team,
Yeah.
where they could have easily lost control of everything with the amount of injuries, the amount of COVID that they've had. Derrick Henry being out, Brown being out, Julio Jones being out, even though I'm not a big fan of him now, I think he's kind of done. But all these injuries happening, and the fact that they've pieced it together and they've been really tough, and the Patriots game was a lot closer than the score actually was. There was a 1-score game for most of the game. And that was when they're decimated by injury. And the fact that they're in the number 1 seed and probably going to be the number 1 seed, I think it just kind of shows they're the team I'm actually most worried about, but probably the most worried about if fully healthy. If Derrick Henry's fully healthy, if Brown's fully healthy, I think it's a big mismatch for the Patriots where they can run and pass.
Can they though?
Yes.
They can pass with Ryan Tannehill?
Because of the threat of Derrick Henry, they can pass. I think the play action that he has and AJ Brown, is it AJ Brown?
Yeah. And just going back, just saying, I know the Titans won in 2019 in the playoffs when they had Derrick Henry and they had AJ Brown. Granted, it was rookie AJ Brown, but they won only throwing 72 yards.
Yeah.
And they only scored 14 points going
threat,
into
the threat of the pass, where I don't think they will throw much or have the need to, and I don't really trust the Patriots run defense against that good of a running back. It all depends if he's healthy. So if Derrick Henry's not 100%, if he's 80%, I don't think they're as tough of a challenge. If he's 100%, I'd be afraid of them just because of how tough Vrabel is. I think that's really the biggest thing that scares me is the coaching factor, where he knows how to beat you. And not many do.
Yeah, I think along those lines, just to talk about it quick before we move on to the next segment, is I do think Vrabel is the best coach in the AFC outside of Belichick that's going to be in the playoffs. So I think that is an advantage for them. But I think maybe I just undervalue Ryan Tannehill so much that I don't see just Derrick Henry beating this Patriots team and Bill Belichick. I can see if they had a better quarterback, I could see them beating them. If they had just a moderate quarterback, let's say Derek Carr with those receivers and that running game, I think with Mike Vrabel as quarterback, I wouldn't really want to face that. But with Ryan Tannehill as your quarterback, I'd rather face the Titans than on the road versus the Chiefs or the Bengals.
I think that may be fair. I think it all just depends.
Just because the Bengals game, I can see it going either ways. I can see it going like the Chargers game where you shut them down, or I can see it going like the Cowboys game where you allow 300 plus passing yards and then allowing 30 plus points a game. So that's just what scares me a little bit, since we've seen that this season already, the Cowboys game.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And then very quickly, if we want to do the Dolphins preview, I think we're kind of running out of time here. I think one of the key things you mentioned beforehand, the struggles of the Patriots historically in Miami, and then just how Brian Flores is against them recently, where I think the Dolphins are 3 and have won 3 out of the last 4 against the Patriots. And I've actually played them really well. So it should be a pretty tough game against them. I'm not a big believer in Tua, and I don't think you are either. But I think Flores' defense, and he knows how to. This is another situation where I think he knows how to beat the Patriots. He knows their schemes. He knows how to defend them. That's really the one thing where I don't think the Miami's offense is that good. I just think it's kind of that defensive kind of pressure that you're going to see from them. And they kind of threw the kitchen sink at Mac Jones the first game. And I expect to see more of the same and maybe even more of that.
No, I think that's a good point. I don't think Tua is a good quarterback. I think just the one thing that worries me a little bit is that first game again, week 1, they were doing a lot of quick slants, and our defensive backs aren't really good at covering those, especially with John Jones being out and having Miles Bryant there, but also Jalen Mills and JC Jackson. So I expect them to do a lot of those quick 1, 2, 3, and then slants and go. So it is tough to defend. I know Brian Flores I think he's a good coach. I know that he's been inconsistent a little bit here and there, but he knows Bill Belichick. He knows how to beat them. And the one thing that does concern me a little bit is, their defense is middle of the pack, upper middle of the pack, but they do get a lot of pressure. They're third in the NFL with 46 sacks. I think the most is 52, 53. Mm-hmm. So they do get after the quarterback. And depending on which offensive line shows up, if it's the offensive line from last week where they only allow one pressure, or if it's the offensive line from the 2 previous weeks versus the Colts and the Bills, where if Mac is getting pressure 30-40% of his dropbacks, it might be a tough game. Mm-hmm. And even if since they're already in the playoffs, it's not as big of a concern. But if they're getting after the quarterback that much, it increases the chances of injury for him too.
Yep. No, 100% agree. And I think just to kind of piggyback on that I think those quick slants that they were doing, that they were killer. I think those are RPOs that they were doing. And I think that was the other thing that really hurt the defenders, where they weren't sure what leverage to have, and then what was actually gonna be happening. And I remember, I think Mills was the one that got really killed on those. So just a thing to watch out. I think maybe their zone coverage may help a little bit more rather than playing man-to-man, where he has to kind of break through the zone, and maybe he might not be able to do that. But they just kind of have to flood the field a little bit more to stop that. So that may help a little bit more, having the zone coverage this time rather than man-to-man, because we know how they're not talented enough to play man-to-man now. So
yeah, I agree.
The game right now, Pats are favored by 6.5, over under set at 39.5. What is your take for this game?
I am ultimately going to go Pats 31-13. I wouldn't be shocked if it's a lot closer of a game. Dolphins do have a pretty good defense, really good defensive mind. And Patriots always struggle in Miami, even late in the season. It used to be first 10 years of the dynasty, they struggled early in the season at Miami, but late in the season at Miami, they were good. But now it's kind of vice versa. I think that they'll win. I think that they piggyback off of last week's performance. They don't do as good of a performance as last week, because it's tough to score 50 points and beat an opponent by 40. But I think they still win 31-13, and just win by a few touchdowns, and they just piggyback off that last performance and helps catapult them into the playoffs on a good stretch.
Yep. I'm somewhat close. I have them at 24-13, so I wouldn't take the over in the game. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if it was more closer to 24-20. So it could be a closer game than that. But I do think they're not going to score anywhere close to as much as last week. And I also think that the Dolphins defense is going to kind of show them a few things, and they're not going to have a ton of points. So, but I do think they'll win. I don't like Tua. I don't think he's a winner or anything like that. I don't think he's that good. I don't think he has. People said Mac doesn't have enough of an arm. I think Tua's arm is even worse than Mac's. So
I've been saying since even before he was drafted, his last year in Alabama, he's the modern version, or he's a poor man's version of Marcus Mariota.
That's a good point.
Very similar, both drafted high, both highly regarded out of college, but I don't think they have the arm, and I just don't think they have the talent to be that top 10, top 15 quarterback.
That's a very good aspect. Also, lefties historically do not do well in the NFL. Besides Steve Young, I think it was a lefty, right?
I think so. And then Flutie? Was Flutie a lefty?
No, Flutie was a righty. There's someone else that was a lefty. Michael Vick was a lefty.
Yeah, he was.
Anyway, this is getting a lot of hands. So any other thoughts on the Dolphins?
No, I think it's at least a little bit anxiety is lifted since the Dolphins lost last week, so you don't have to worry about this being a win to get into the playoffs. But it should be, you're going up against a good defense, so it's interesting to see what you do against them the second time you see them.
Yeah, so it should be a good game. Next time you hear from us, it'll be the end of the regular season. We'll be knowing who the Patriots playoff opponent is going to be. Hopefully it's not a Monday night game going forward. I really don't like that they added that. I don't think you do either. So again, as a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pat's 300 Level Pod. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Catch us on the YouTube. And eventually one of these days we will have a blog out, probably in the off season, but we'll see if that happens. We'll let you know there, and maybe on the pod when that happens as well. So thank you very much, and catch us next week. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.